Hello EDUSPLORERs, thanks for joining us again and welcome back to our channel. If you are joining us for the first time, we appreciate your time. In this episode, I really want to dive into the current geopolitical narrative that's coming out from Washington that the continent of Africa is not united with regards to the veto power conversation. How amazing is this? I have a wide-ranging interview to play coming from the United States of America's current ambassador at the United Nations, Thomas Linde Greenfield. You all know this ambassador. I really want to talk about this because when I listened to that interview, it kept me thinking that what is Africa doing? You guys are not united, and the narrative that the geopolitical partner has at the moment is like there is infighting. So I really want to dive into this because if you don't communicate your strategic engagement on what you are looking for and where does Africa stand, who will be at the United Nations with the voting power, then the geopolitical partners don't know where you stand. Now, this is what she said first before we get ready, and this is just a warm-up.
But I don't think the continent is unified on what it will mean to have two permanent seats. You know, I've spoken, Nigeria says it's not a question. Of course Nigeria is going to get it. And South Africa says this is not up for discussion. And then I hear from Ethiopia, we should have always had a permanent seat. We were a victor in World War II. So what are you talking about? Of course, Ethiopia is going to have a permanent seat. And then you have North Africa, that they're part of the AU. They're on the continent. So where does Egypt and Algeria and Morocco fit into this, into what is going to happen? So Africans are going to have to sit in the context of the AU or in the context of the C10 and figure out what it means for them. That's not going to be for me.
So the ambassador clearly said that South Africa, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and other countries in North Africa, they are fighting over who will be having the veto power or represent Africa on that particular strategic seat. It kept me worried, like, what's Africa doing? What are you guys up to? Because it appears, despite the momentum that's in place.
As world leaders convened at the UN, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa once again called for urgent reform of the UN Security Council. Africa remains unrepresented among the 5 permanent veto-wielding members.
78 years since its formation, the structure of the United Nations Security Council remains largely unchanged. Africa and its 1.4 billion people remain excluded from its key decision-making structures. This cannot continue. The Security Council has not fulfilled its mandate to maintain international peace and security. The UN Security Council must be reformed as a matter of agency.
You fail to muster the courage to work on within the African Union, to come out clear, to communicate on the positions where you stand. If you do not say that in the geopolitical engagement, then it goes back to what we say, that you are sending mixed signals to your strategic partners, whether it's in the United Nations, the United States, China, Russia, European Union, Indians, or Middle Eastern partners. The narrative now is that you guys are confused and you are fighting amongst yourself. How devastating is that? And this can keep the conversation, especially now that the current US administration is going out. And where does the conversation stand at this stage? It's difficult to know. You see, geopolitics is a brutal game, like I've always said. And if Africa cannot select or pick its battles more carefully, re-strategize from the African Union and engage as one voice, then you continue to hear things like this.
The idea of African leadership, I think, is a great segue to one of the other issues that you've been working on at the Security Council, which is the reform of the Security Council and a leadership role for Africans on the Security Council. President Biden, in his first year in office, pledged a permanent seat for an African member state at the Security Council. And just this last year, his last address at the General Assembly, he doubled down, literally doubled down, and offered two-seaters, suggested that there should be 2 permanent seats for African members. Upon some clarification that maybe the United States didn't support those seats having veto power, there was some consternation among African states suggesting that maybe the United States was proposing a kind of second-class standing for Africans at the Security Council. Can you talk about where you have left those negotiations and discussions around the expansion of the Security Council right now, and what your views are on what that should look like?
Yeah, look, reform is a process. We're not going to come in and suddenly say thou shalt, and the UN will change in the image of whatever it is that we want. So that process, we move the needle on that process. The Sierra Leonean ambassador said our announcements had a seismic impact on the whole reform discussions. What Africans, the C12 or C10, I think, asked for is 2 permanent seats, 2 additional elected seats, and the veto power. And there has to be another broader discussion, because at that point, 2 permanent seats, 2 additional elected seats, and already 3 elected seats, without knowing what the big picture will look like. How many members of the Security Council will there be? We're at 15 now. So before you decide that one continent is going to have 7, you have to decide what the big picture is going to be. Whether it's going to be 21, if it's going to be 25, whatever the broad number. And that will take place within the text-based negotiations. And that was our second announcement, that we supported something we had not supported before, text-based negotiations that will lead to that process. There was a lot of consternation because we did not announce that we supported the veto power. My message to the C10 was, this is a process. And if you think the process is that your demands will be immediately granted without considering the demands of others, it's just not going to happen. You have to be a part of this process. Take what you have, continue to negotiate for what you want. So I said to them, if you're turning down the 2 permanent seats because the veto power is not there, and it's not our decision in any case, but 2 permanent seats is a big deal. We continue the negotiations to see where the negotiations lead. If you don't want to negotiate, we're stuck where we have been now for more than 10 years, where every single year the IGN comes in, gives a report, and every single one of us walk in the door and give the same speech that we gave the previous year. And we've not moved the needle at all. We're trying to move that needle. And it doesn't mean the needle is going to go from here to here immediately. It's going to go from here to here. And then we lock that in, and it goes from here to here until we get to a place that we want to find ourselves. And it's not just about what the Africans want, it's about what the rest of the world wants as well. So all of that is part of the negotiation. It is not something that the U.S. on its own will decide. One of the responses I got on our announcement that we supported 2 permanent seats is, yay, that means 1 seat will go to the African Union and 1 seat will be rotating for 10 years. And I went back and said, what's permanent about a rotating seat? And when When did the African Union become a member state?
Right.
Because that's what the Security Council is made of. So it's a discussion. We'll continue that discussion and hopefully get to a place where we come out of this with a new UN that is more fit for purpose than what it is today.
Talking about the momentum, it is just the bitter truth, what she's saying, because I think what they have signaled, what they have felt from the interactions with African delegations from North Africa, from the African Union itself, and major players in the continent, like South Africa, Nigeria, Ethiopia, North African partners, and some strategic countries in the region. The message has been that of disunity. There is no clear communication, except from the president of Sierra Leone, who to an extent came out pretty clear and lashed out to the reason why Africa should sit on that same Security Council and have that veto power so they can make decisions that affect the continent of Africa. It goes back to the question why the ambassador is talking about this, because they have sensed the cracks within the continent of Africa. So it's so easy for the geopolitical partners to identify where the cracks are in the continent. And that's something that the governments and organizations have to work. You got to clear emotions out from this particular engagement because it's vital for your survival as a body, as a group, as a T10 or whatever it's called in the United Nations. So if you do not figure out how to keep this conversation going about the veto powers, then the veto powers will be used by the major powers to keep manipulating you guys. I think the ambassador has come out pretty clear where they stand and where the United States stands.
Do you think that there's both momentum to carry this conversation going forward right now? Is there enough kind of built up momentum there that in your absence, in the absence of people who care about these issues, that it will continue? And are the Africans organized themselves enough around this issue? Is there enough unanimity on the continent to be a driver for this to go forward?
No, I'm not going to speak for the continent, although I regularly impose myself as an A3+1 and would fight to ensure that my +1 status would be accepted, because I've spent so much of my life on the continent of Africa, and I had a good relationship with the A3. But I don't think the continent is unified on what it will mean to have 2 permanent seats. You know, I've spoken, Nigeria says, it's not a question. Of course Nigeria is going to get it. And South Africa says, this is not up for discussion. And then I hear from Ethiopia, we should have always had a permanent seat. We were a victor in World War II. So what are you talking about? Of course Ethiopia is going to have a permanent seat. And then you have North Africa, that they're part of the AU. They're on the continent. So where does Egypt and Algeria and Morocco fit into this, into what is going to happen? So Africans are going to have to sit in the context of the AU or in the context of the C10 and figure out what it means for them. That's not going to be for me to decide.
It's devastating. But again, I think conversation or interviews like this makes a lot of sense to let the African governments re-strategize on how to engage their strategic partners around the world. By African governments sitting there, giving it to the chin and allowing the message to be read, because the partners are reading Africa now that there's total disunity. These particular interviews didn't just go in limbo. They are policy conversation that has taken place. They are very vital discussions that their partners are sitting on a daily basis and reviewing. So if North Africa is talking, Nigeria is talking, Ethiopia is talking about their position, and other South Africa is talking about their position, then they can sense really easily and use that against you and store the process. Don't forget, Donald Trump's coming to power, and he's never going to do anything different. It may even get worse. Talking about moving the needle, as he pointed out, the needle hasn't moved. And these can be used, the disunity aspect, the perception of disunity can be used as an opportunity to stall the process. So, what should Africa do? African government should go back to the drawing board at the African Union, address this issue, come back at one voice, make your position clear. The rotating conversation, the point she raised, is an essential point. And African Union itself cannot have a veto power at the Security Council. It is not a country. It's kind of a representative body of a continent. So let's not mix apples and oranges in the way we communicate. It is devastating. And this geopolitics is brutal, like I said. So we have to pick our fight clearly and address these issues head on. Because this wide-ranging interview that the ambassador is talking about, it's a signal she's sending to Africa that, hey folks, it's not going to be business as usual, because we're leaving office soon and the other guys coming. It might not be the same policy. It might not be supported. I think that Africa should sit up and revisit this issue and come back clear and make their position clear. Let me know in the comment section what you think in regards to this particular interview and why the continent of Africa should take this interview as a conclusive perspective from the United States of America. Leave me a comment. I will be looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.